As we work through solving inequalities and graphing them, I want you to work these out with me. The thing that we'll pay attention to is the variable. So we're always trying to solve for X or for K or for Y, whatever the letter is. And in order to do that, we do the opposite steps in the reverse order. And then some of these we're going to graph. So if we look at X being multiplied by 5 and then added 2, we are going to first do the opposite of adding 2. So we'll start here by subtracting 2 on both sides. 2 minus 2 cancels out. I'm going to drop down this 5x. We'll also drop down this less than or equal to sign. And then 17 minus 2 is 15. Again, we still pay attention to the x. And since it's being multiplied by 5, we're going to do the opposite operation. So we draw a fraction bar to show we're dividing by 5. Do the same thing on this side. 5 divided by 5 is 1, so this cancels out. We're left with just the x. Drop down that less than or equal to sign. And 15 divided by 5 is 3. And as the rule states, because there is a line underneath this, that means the variable is included. So we would do a closed circle on 3. And then we're going to shade everything to the left because it's less than. Next problem here says 21 is less than or equal to 3 plus 9x. And my variable again is x. So I'm going to pay attention to this. I'm going to do the opposite of everything that's being done to us, being multiplied by 9 and then added 3. So do the opposite steps in the reverse order. So the first thing, because this is a positive 3, it's like adding 3. So I'm going to subtract 3 from this side and subtract 3 from this side. 3 minus 3 cancels out. 21 minus 3 is 18. I have 18 is less than or equal to 9x. And because the x is being multiplied by 9, I'm going to do the opposite, which is dividing by 9. This cancels out. 18 divided by 9 is 2, is less than or equal to x. And I always care about the perspective of the x, so I'm going to rewrite this to say x is greater than or equal to 2. And because this line is here, that means it's a closed circle. And I want to shade everything to the right because it's greater than. The next problem here says 9 minus x is greater than 10. And again, my x is my concern. And the first thing I'm going to address is this positive 9. So the opposite of adding 9 would be subtracting 9. This would cancel out. And I would be left with the negative x is greater than 10 minus 9 is positive 1. Here, when I have negative x, this is equal to negative 1x. So I am going to put that coefficient here to show that this is being multiplied by negative 1, and the opposite of that is dividing by negative 1. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 would just be positive 1. I'm going to put the x here. And then 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. But I want you to pay attention. When you are multiplying or dividing by a negative, you have a coefficient here that's negative, you have to reverse this sign. So it started off as greater than. We're going to flip it around and make it less than. So x is less than negative 1. And the reason we changed the symbol from greater than to less than is because we wanted this to be accurate. And so you have to flip that symbol around. So x is less than negative 1. We go to negative 1. This should be an open circle. And all the numbers that are less than negative 1 are to the left. (27) is less than or equal to 7x plus 6. And again, my focus is on the x. and I want to do the opposite steps in reverse order. The first thing that happens is the x is being multiplied by 7, then adding 6. So I'm going to address the plus 6 first and subtract 6 because that's the opposite. 6 minus 6 is 0. That cancels out. 27 minus 6 is 21. Is less than or equal to 7x. I address this x again, and I look, it's being multiplied by 7. So I am going to divide by 7. 7 divided by 7 is just 1. Drop down my x. 21 divided by 7 is 3. I have a less than or equal to sign here. And I care about the perspective of the x. And since we all read from left to right, I just changed this to say x is greater than or equal to positive 3. So I go to positive 3. I make a closed circle because it is included. Because this line, I must have this circle closed. And then I shade everything to the right. Positive 3. And that goes on infinitely. Next problem says 2x minus 5 is greater than positive 1. And the opposite of minus 5 here is plus 5. Negative 5 plus 5 is the same thing as 5 minus 5, which is 0, so that cancels out. And 1 plus 5 is 6. I drop down my 2x. Drop down my greater than sign. The opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. 2 divided by 2 cancels out. We're left with just positive 1. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. Drop down my greater than sign. And there is no line, so I want an open circle. X is greater than 3, means we shade everything to the right of 3. 3 is not included, but every number larger than that is. A negative 2x minus 3 is less than or equal to negative 5. And again, only thing we are concerned with is the x. It's being multiplied by negative 2 and then subtracting 3. So the opposite of subtracting 3 first would be plus 3. Negative 3 plus 3 cancels out. Negative 5 plus 3 would be negative 2. And then negative 2x here. The less than or equal to sign. And again, we have a negative coefficient. And I care about this variable. So what I want to do is the opposite of multiplying by negative 2, which is dividing by negative 2. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is positive 1. Leaves me with an x. Negative 2 divided by negative 2, again, is positive 1. This symbol was a less than or equal to sign, but we divided by a negative coefficient here. So this was a negative 2, so I must reverse this symbol and make it a greater than or equal to sign. So now I go to positive 1. There's a line underneath that symbol, so I'll make sure it's included. And greater than means everything to the right. So I would shade all of these numbers. Nine x minus 7 is less than or equal to 38. And what I care about here is the x again. So the opposite steps in the reverse order. So first they're multiplying by 9 and subtracting 7. So the opposite of subtracting 7 is adding 7. And 38 plus 7 is 45 here. Drop down the 9x. Drop down the less than or equal to sign. 9 times x is less than or equal to 45. I would divide by 9 here. 9 divided by 9 is positive 1. So leaves me with x is less than or equal to. And 45 divided by 9 is 5. And these we're not going to graph. We're just going to leave these as the correct answer here. 3 is less than x over 2 divided by 1. And again, all I care about is the x. I'm going to highlight that here. This is what's important to me. And I want to do the opposite steps in the reverse order. So they're dividing by 2 and then adding 1. The opposite of adding 1 is just subtracting 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 3 minus 1 is 2. I drop down my less than sign. And then my x divided by 2. The opposite of dividing by 2 is multiplying by 2. I'm going to write it like a fraction on this side. 2 over 1. And then over here, I'm going to write it as a whole number. Just positive 2. The reason I'm doing that is to show anytime you have something in the top and the bottom that are the same, you can just cancel these out. This would leave me with x over 1, which is the same thing as just x. And then 2 divided by 2 is 4. So I have 4 is less than x. And again, we will flip this around to read it as x is greater than 4. And this would be our final answer. Negative 8x plus 18 is greater than negative 22. My concern is this x. And I look at what happens to it. It's being multiplied by negative 8 and then adding 18 to it. So the opposite of adding 18 is what I'm going to address first. And that would be subtracting 18. 18 minus 18 is 0, so we cancel that out. Then we have a negative 22 minus 18. Because both of these signs are the same, I'm going to add them and keep them the same. So this would stay negative 40. Then I drop down my negative 8x. And I drop down the greater than sign. The next thing I would do, because I'm still addressing this x, is the opposite of multiplying by negative 8, which means dividing by negative 8. When I divide by a negative 8 divided by negative 8, it's just positive 1, so I bring the x down. But I have to pay attention to this sign. It started off as a greater than sign. So now I'm going to reverse it and make it a less than sign. And negative 40 divided by negative 8 is positive 5. So I should have x is less than 5. $50 is less than 8 minus 6x. So I look at the x again. That's what I pay attention to. And this is a positive 8, so we do the opposite, which is subtracting 8. 8 minus 8 cancels out. And then 50 minus 8 is 42. 42 is less than negative 6x. The x is my concern. It's the thing I'm paying attention to. So I look and there is a negative 6 attached to it, which means we're multiplying by negative 6. So the opposite is dividing by negative 6. Do it to the left side and the right. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 is positive 1. And 42 divided by negative 6 is negative 7. I have an x over here. But keep in mind, when we divide by negative 6, it started off as less than. We are going to reverse it and make it greater than. And we read it from the perspective of the x. So we're going to say x is less than negative 7. And this is our final answer. Negative x over 5 plus 6 is greater than negative 3. And my concern is the x. That's what I pay attention to. Dividing that by 5, negative 5, which is what we'll call that, plus 6. And then that must be greater than negative 3. So I first address this positive 6 or plus 6, and I subtract 6 from both sides. 6 minus 6 cancels out. I have negative 3 minus 6. Because both of the signs are the same, I'm going to add and keep them the same. So that becomes a negative 9. I drop down this negative x over 5 and make this greater than. And I'm going to refer to this as 1x over 5 or 1/5 x. So we'll see that the opposite of 1 over 5 is just 5 over 1. And again, we write it like a fraction on this side. And because this is negative sign is here, this becomes a negative number. And again, I'm going to cancel this out. Negative times a negative becomes a positive 1. And this should have been a negative 5 here. Negative 9 times negative 5 is positive 45. This started off as a greater than sign, and I multiplied by a negative, so I must reverse the symbol, make this x is less than 45. $30 is greater than or equal to negative 30 minus 6x. Again, this is my focus here. So I look, there's a negative 6 being multiplied by it, and we're subtracting 30 from it. Because it's a negative 30, I'm going to do the opposite of that, which is positive 30 or adding 30 to both sides. Negative 30 plus 30 cancels out, and then 30 plus 30 here is 60. Drop down the greater than or equal to sign, and then drop down the negative 6x. The opposite of dividing by negative 6. I'm sorry, opposite of multiplying by negative 6 is dividing by negative 6, because I'm concerned with the x. I want to do the opposite here, which is dividing by negative 6. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 is just positive 1. And then 60 divided by negative 6 will give me negative 10. I look at this symbol, and it started off as a greater than or equal to sign, so I must reverse it. Because this was a negative 6, I'll leave the x here. But I'm reading from the perspective of the x, so I'm going to call this x. It's greater than or equal to negative 10. $15 minus 5k is greater than or equal to 0. And I start with the 15 because the only thing I care about here is this k. Look at the k, and there's a negative 5 being multiplied to it and adding 15. So the first thing is the opposite of adding 15, opposite of positive 15 is negative 15. So I subtract 15 from both sides. 15 minus 15 is 0. Drop down the negative 5k. Drop down the greater than or equal to sign. And 0 minus 15 is negative 15. Negative 5 times k is greater than or equal to negative 15 is how you would read this. And I only care about the k. In order to get that alone, isolate the variable, we have to do the opposite of multiplying by negative 5, which is dividing by negative 5. Rewrite that. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 is just positive 1. So we leave this as 1k, looks like that. And then negative 15 divided by negative 5 is positive 3. And this symbol was a greater than or equal to sign, and I divided by negative 5. So I now must reverse it and make this a less than or equal to sign. 3 minus x over 3 is greater than -4. When you look at some of these problems, they may be intimidating, but we don't do anything differently. We still focus on this. And if we follow the steps, it's not difficult to solve it all. So we got x being divided by -3, and then we're adding 3 to that. So we're addressing this +3 first. The opposite of +3 is -3, or subtracting by 3 on both sides. So 3 minus 3 cancels out. I drop down the negative x over 3, the greater than symbol, and -4 minus 3 is -7. Again, I'm going to add a 1 to this. So this becomes a 1/3 x, or 1x over 3. The opposite of that is simply to flip that fraction over, which means I'm multiplying by a -3 on both sides. I do that to show that I can cancel out this -3 with this -3. And that leaves me with a -1 times -1, which is just +1x. And then -7 times -3 is +21. And that means I need to reverse this symbol because I multiplied by a negative. And that leaves me with x is less than 21. Our next problem says -2x minus 14 is less than or equal to 86. Again, I focus on this x. And the opposite of minus 14 is adding 14. -14 plus 14 cancels out. And then 86 plus 14 is 100. And so I have -2x is less than or equal to 100. I'm going to divide by -2 because the x is my only concern. -2 divided by -2, +1. I drop down the x. And then 100 divided by -2 is -50. And I look at this symbol. It started off as less than or equal to -50, and I want to make it greater than or equal to because I divided by a negative, and that would be it. The next problem says 11w plus 6 is greater than or equal to 182. And I want to do the opposite of adding 6, which is subtracting 6. 6 minus 6 cancels out. I have 182 minus 6, which gives me 176. Drop down 11w greater than or equal to 176. And because they are multiplying by 11 with this w, the w is the only thing that I care about, remember. I want to divide by 11. This cancels out. And if do quick division here, you may use a calculator, but 11 goes into 17 one time, goes into 66 6 times. So this would leave us with w is greater than or equal to 16. This says x is divided by -11 is greater than or equal to -14. And again, we're going to follow the same formula. The only thing I'm concerned with is this x. And because that's true, what I want to do is the opposite steps in the same order. They're dividing by 5, subtracting 11, and making that greater than or equal to -14. So I pay attention to this -11 first, and the opposite of that is +11. This cancels out. Negative 14 plus 11 is negative 3. Signs are different. We subtract and take the sign of the larger number. So drop down x divided by 5 is greater than or equal to negative 3. And because I'm dividing by 5 with x, the opposite of that is multiplying by 5. Write it like a fraction on this side, and like a whole number over here. 5 divided by 5 cancels out. I'm left with x over 1, which is just x. I keep the sign because this was not negative, so I don't have to do anything with this sign. And negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. Work out one last problem here. We have 7 is less than 4q minus 9. And my only concern is this q. And the opposite steps in the reverse order. So multiply it by 4 and then subtract it 9. So I'm going to start off by adding 9 and then dividing 4 afterwards. So negative 9 plus 9 is the same thing as 9 minus 9. This cancels out. 7 plus 9 is 16. Is less than 4q. The opposite of multiplying by 4 is dividing by 4. We show that by this fraction bar. Divided by 4 here. Divided by 4 here. 4 divided by 4 is just positive 1. That leaves me with q. 16 divided by 4 is 4. So I have 4 is less than q. And I want to write that from the perspective of the q. So I call that q is greater than positive 4.